We still know that we have this incredible, powerful, life-changing gospel that we can share with people, and it super applies to everything that's going on today, just as it did all those years ago when it was written.
Yeah.
So lesson to you people out there, you know something's good, you know what I mean? You know it's like, oh, it's a productive thing when people coming at it with like an attitude of how can we make this work?
Right. Yep.
You know what I mean? Pressure is a relative term, and
we got to take responsibility for what we're preparing, what we're putting out there.
Yeah, but let us not call it pressure like the way that, you know what I mean, that real
I like that
families are facing.
Welcome back to Life and Faith Podcast. Happy to be here with you, Dan. How are you doing?
I am really doing well, man. Just really busy, but good. I accidentally scheduled myself for something morning, noon, and night every day this week. It's Friday night, and I didn't have something to do Monday morning or Monday night. I don't think. I can't really remember back that far, but I didn't have anything to do Monday morning or night. So I worked Monday, and then Tuesday it was like workout, work, discipleship, workout, work, band practice, and other things. Workout, work, and then elder meeting, workout, work, podcasting, and then tomorrow is golf outing. So
okay. Yeah.
My eyes are heavy, but my spirit is bright. As long as what you're doing is worth doing. It's when things aren't worth doing, that's when the stress comes.
Yeah.
You know, if you're just doing so many useless, you know, overcommitting in not useful ways, but you know, being part of this podcast and sitting down with you and late on a Friday night is just like, that's exactly where I want to be. So, you know, it's really cool. I'm blessed to be a part of it.
Yeah, same here. Speaking of podcast, this episode is all about celebrating the 1-year anniversary of the Life and Faith podcast. And more so just from sitting here with you tonight, but really when this goes live and our listeners are listening to it, we're celebrating with you because there would be no Life and Faith podcast if there was really nobody to listen to. We're thankful for you all that are listeners. And so I've got a couple of questions here. I'd say more than a couple, but I'm going to go through some facts and figures, some stats a little bit of this past year. So we'll spend a little bit of time on that, but then I'd like to go into some questions that I'm going to pose to Dan and just be able to kind of take a trip down memory lane, so to speak. Dan, this is kind of you can answer this two different ways because the question is how many episodes, but that's different depending on if you're talking about right now at this point in time when we're recording and how many episodes when this goes live.
Oh yeah. Well, we're looking at we're going to post number 50 this week. And I think we have one in the hopper and this will be 52.
Mm-hmm.
And Buzzsprout counts our announcement for season 2 as an episode.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody cares about that. I'm just saying it's 53. It's in the 50s.
It's a complicated question, right?
Yeah, it's in the 50s. My personal goal is to get to 85. That's, you know what I mean. That's kind of where I'm looking at 85. Like I'm kind of staring at it from across the room, you know, going, "How you doing?" You know, and so that's my goal. But
milestones.
Yeah, milestone. Like I don't know why 85. I think I heard somebody say 85 was a marker for a podcast, you know.
Okay.
And it keeps me going through when I look at the stats and it's not as high as I think it should be, or I hear somebody else is doing so much more listenership than we are, that kind of thing. And I try to just remember, like, you know, we're just regular guys. We're not social media gurus or anything. We're just people that, you know, had something to say.
Right, and that's a good point. Like, really, to compare apples to apples, you would need to compare this podcast with something similar that talks about similar topics. At least in my experience, there's some that do really well. Typically, probably video podcasts that have a little bit more involved in production. But in this space, I'd say in our category, we're talking about the Bible, things of the Bible, Christianity. They don't typically do as well as, say, you know, anything else like
fantasy
sports.
Football podcasts or
like,
and I'm okay with that. You know what I mean?
Totally fine.
I'm totally fine with that. I think a lot of it does come down to the fact that we have day jobs and families, and you know, we're just we're two, like I say, we have something to say. And so right now,
Mhm.
the bulk of the success is based on the thing that we have to say. And if you have the manpower or the finances or the following to build up all that stuff on the outside of it, then it becomes more successful. Like if you're a celebrity person, even in your own
Right.
circle, like even if you're not a celebrity in the world sense, but like if you're well known in your area, even like a pastor who's been a pastor for 20 years or something.
Yeah.
And then that person says, I have a podcast. And then, like 1,000 people know immediately. But if you're just guys like us, and you know what I'm saying? It's like you have that sort of all that marketing or that other stuff on the side. That's what will help the boat float a little higher than ours is floating at this time. But that's okay. We're going
Yeah.
to get there,
Yeah. Putting it all in perspective, I think, is important, and that's really the goal of this episode is to think about how far we've come in a year. And do you happen to know how many downloads that we have?
We have 745.
745. You're right.
Yeah.
I was pretty sure you would get that one.
Yeah.
Do you know how many continents we've reached?
Well, all but Antarctica.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, where we get this from is Buzzsprout, which is like the home for it distributes to all the different podcasts. So wherever you're listening, it starts with Buzzsprout and it distributes it to wherever you listen to. But it's got those statistics, and it doesn't even show Antarctica. So
Okay. So all of them.
yeah, so all of the ones that Buzzsprout keeps track of, at
Okay.
least. Yeah. So how about this one? Because now we're going to get a little bit more granular. Can you guess how many countries we've reached with the podcast?
Oh, I don't know that one.
Yeah, so there's 16 at this time, 16
Oh,
countries.
Okay.
We've got the lion's share, which is probably nobody's surprise, which is USA. But then in second, can you take a guess at who's our second?
Our second place one is like a South American country, like Venezuela or Nicaragua or something.
Nicaragua.
Yeah.
There you go. Yep, Nicaragua.
See, I pay attention. I didn't know
Close
I was
second
needing to do
place.
my homework, but apparently I did.
Yeah, I just thought it'd be fun to see if you know, and then fun for the listeners to
Yeah.
hear too, because there's somebody in Nicaragua that's like, "Hey, that's me."
Thank you, our Nicaraguan fans.
Yes, yep. And then now, what's the third one? Just for fun.
Third one is it England?
Nope, it's Zimbabwe.
Zimbabwe.
Close behind that one. So there's actually a sizable gap between Nicaragua and Zimbabwe. Close behind that one, though, is Australia.
Okay.
So we have, and these are kind of fractional listenership,
Yeah,
but at the
yeah.
same time, I just think it's kind of interesting and neat to see who's listening. And then the one right behind that is Guyana, and then we have El Salvador, Malaysia, Philippines, Canada. It's like,
There
come on,
you go.
Canada, you guys got to step
I know.
it up.
I love Canada
We're-
so much.
They're basically our neighbors where we're at.
Yeah.
Here in Michigan, and yeah. All right. So
If I had to pick a country to live in that was not America, I'd pick Canada. I really like nothing I don't like about it, really.
yeah, South Africa, and then UK. UK is
Okay.
after South Africa, and then after that it really falls off. Like we're talking
Yeah.
like one person per, but it's probably not one. It's like a couple. But you have Germany, Brazil. Even people from the UAE, which I thought was interesting, especially 'cause some of the topics we talk about on here. Nigeria, and then Puerto Rico. And so I just thought that was interesting to get it. So shout out to all of you who live in those countries. We appreciate you giving us a chance at least, and maybe coming back a time here or there. And then can you guess how many cities that all entails between all those countries?
No idea.
It's 141 cities
Wow. Okay.
across the world. I was going to say what are the top like 10 cities, but the number one is obvious and it kind of doxes us and gives us away. So I just have redacted Michigan. So, but then
I've lived in Redacted for some time now.
yeah. Redacted's a real nice place. Great
Yeah, it has its moments.
place to raise a family.
Yep.
Secondly, surprise, surprise, another city in Michigan is Howell, Michigan. I was just actually surprised. I don't know who's listening to us in Howell, but Shout out to you guys. And then
Could
all
be
right.
Jeff.
Dan, correct me if I'm wrong on my pronunciation. I've been trying to work on my pronunciation
Okay.
of Michigan cities. Livonia.
Livonia.
Yes, I got it. Okay.
See,
Livonia, Michigan.
I'd like to cite to everybody that I had an opportunity to lead Josh wrong there, and I didn't take it.
Yeah. I appreciate
No, it's
that.
pronounced Livonia.
Livonia?
Yeah, it's Livonia. It's no big deal. Then for the rest of his life, he'd be talking
Livonia.
about it, and then people would be like, "What are you talking about?"
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I've gotten it before when people are like, "You don't know how to pronounce that." And I'm like, "Well, I only have lived here for like a fraction of my life."
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
And then this is also not a surprise if you kind of heard some of the episodes where I talk about where I'm from originally. But the next one on the list is Arlington, Texas,
Okay.
home of the world champion Texas Rangers.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say the King of the Hill.
That's Arlen.
Oh,
Yes.
but it's got to be based on that, right? I mean,
No, Arlen's a real place.
oh, really?
Yep. I think it's out in West Texas.
I can't believe we've never had this conversation.
Somebody's probably listening and they live in Arlen. They're like, that's not where it is.
Oh,
But,
I don't.
yeah.
I feel bad.
I don't think
So,
I've actually been in Arlen before.
Okay, is Arlington close to where you grew up?
Yeah.
Oh.
Arlington is in between. It's kind of halfway between Dallas and Fort Worth. I grew up in South Fort Worth.
Oh, okay.
So Arlington, Texas. And then another surprise on this list was Chicago, Illinois. So quite a few listeners from Chicago. The next is Dallas, Texas, followed by Detroit, Michigan. And then Cleveland, Ohio. I was actually surprised at how many times Ohio pops up on this. I'm not going to go through the entire list for obvious reasons, but there's quite a bit of different cities in Ohio. Then there's Canton, Michigan. We got a plethora of more Michigan cities. Plymouth, Ann Arbor. Also wanted to give a special shout out. There's quite a few people that live in Tennessee listening. There's Managua. I wrote in the pronunciation here. That's where everybody's coming from in Nicaragua. That's Managua is where a lot of our listeners are coming from. Quite a few in Oklahoma and also San Salvador. So
Okay.
shout out to you listeners. We appreciate you listening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, how about this, Dan? Do you know what are our top 5 platforms that people are using to listen to the Life and Faith podcast?
Well, there's really not that. I mean, it's obvious ones, right? It's going to be like Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. What else would be on that list? It'd have to be. Is it Pocket Casts?
You've got 3 out of 5.
Okay, wait a minute. I'm trying to think what the other two are.
One you got to think outside the box too.
Is it Pocket Casts?
Nope.
No.
That is on the list, but I want to say that Pocket Cast is like the bottom of.
That's the one I like. I mean, since Google Podcast went away, I didn't want to use Google Podcast, but it was so easy.
Yeah.
And then they moved it all over to YouTube Music, and it's like,
Yep.
it's twice as crappy now. And so it's just so frustrating that they do stuff like that because they just try to coax you over because they didn't want to compete with Spotify, you know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So they put the music, so they're more competing with Apple Music at that point,
Mm-hmm.
you know? But Google Podcast, the app was easy to use, but I've been using Pocket Cast lately. That's a really good one. Spotify, I don't really care for. I don't know. I mean, I personally, I know, like, obviously we're on them, we're on the platform or whatever, and some people like it, but I tend to listen to music in order, like in album order, and I think it shuffles the stuff, doesn't it? I don't know if it plays. Do you know anything about Spotify?
Yeah, it shuffles. I think there's probably people that are more experienced at using it than I am.
Yeah.
Like maybe I think if you pay for a subscription, it won't do that. But
Yeah, so I don't know. You know, it's dealer's choice, I suppose. But I've been using Pocket Cast lately. It's escaping me now. But go ahead.
So if you're looking at Buzzsprout, which you got to look beyond Buzzsprout to get a full scope of this, but Buzzsprout says our top overall is Google Podcasts, which if you look at the last 5 episodes, that's not on there anymore because of what you said. It recently went away and became YouTube Music. And so since it became YouTube Music has jumped up to our second spot on.
Oh, is it actually on there?
It's actually on there. Yep. And
Okay, good.
yep. So it is showing up there, and then underneath Google Podcasts was Spotify. So overall, people are coming and listen to it on Spotify. But actually, the first, that's why I was saying you got to think out of the box, is actually YouTube. YouTube, we have.
I see. I wasn't considering that because you don't post directly to YouTube through Buzzsprout.
Right.
So I was thinking specifically that's what you meant by outside of the box. When you said outside of the box, I thought you meant the smaller, because there's like probably a half a dozen or more oddball ones that you don't normally think of or normally get your podcast from.
Yeah. So YouTube is actually in the top spot overall, and then Google Podcasts / YouTube Music, then Spotify, then Pandora, and then Apple Podcasts.
Yeah, Pandora is another thing I don't even understand, but
kids these days.
Kids today with Pandora is like that Android app just is not functional, and boy, it bugs me. And it doesn't really connect very well, and neither does iHeartRadio. Like if you get into the boonies up around where we are, it just tends to fail. But
which, by the way, this is probably a good time for me to tell you that this is sponsored by Pandora. No, I'm just kidding. After Dan's,
well, we were anyway.
Yeah,
before
we
just
lost that live here. They just gave me a call. So with all that in mind, that's kind of the statistics I wanted to bring there, just for fun. So now kind of more of the interview side of it. Dan, this is kind of a question for both of us here, and I'll give some input too, but do you remember how this podcast got started?
Oh, yeah. Well,
We've kind of told a little bit of this.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a long
episodes,
story,
but-
so I was trying to put it into a nutshell sort of thing. I guess you and I had been having conversations throughout the pandemic, and we were in a position to be able to kind of talk for long periods of time, like maybe an hour at a time, because of our work situation. So we had maybe an hour to kill or whatever, and we'd just be chatting, and of course all this stuff was on the pulse, and then and actually an aspect of this story that we haven't really talked about on this podcast that at least somewhat contributed, because we had the idea for this probably like a year before we actually did it, didn't we? Like we sat on it for a second, didn't we?
Yeah, technically we probably were sitting on it for about 2.5 years.
We were, weren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we were like, yeah, we should. And then I think somewhere during the pandemic, we have a mutual friend, Kristen, who had a podcast, and I didn't know she had a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out to Sinister Sweethearts. And I thought, this is cool. I super want to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And I had actually talked to her before we started this, and I was just telling her about some of my fears, like, I don't like the way I sound when I talk, and I don't know if I was going to have good topics, and and all this stuff. And she was like, "That's bupkis, go and do it. Just jump in, that kind of thing." And then you and I had a conversation after that fact. So I won't say it was the deciding factor, but it was like what she did for us, or for maybe you weren't even aware that I had that conversation with her. But what she did for us was she removed all of my self-doubt barriers to get started.
Yeah.
Because I still had self-doubt after we got started, because I was like, I don't know, But she helped, because sometimes it does help for me to bounce stuff off of people and to have them say, no, that's crazy. Like I won't go into another story about that, but basically just to say, it helps me when somebody says, no, that's crazy. Don't doubt yourself. You can totally do this, because, I mean, it's not, here we are like 50 episodes. Here we are a year later.
Yeah.
Consistently too. We didn't take a break. We took
week after week.
Yeah, week after week. We've posted every week at least. Mm-hmm. We did take little breaks here and there for our families and things like that, but those were all planned and everything like that. And I really have liked the cadence of how we've been doing things. I've not felt but anyway, I'm getting away from the question you asked, was how did this start, and how it started was we just felt like we had something to say. We felt like we had something that the world needed to hear, that that wasn't about us.
Yeah.
That wasn't you and I saying we need to take our country back.
Right.
We weren't saying none of that. It was like we knew, we still know. We still know that we have, oh my goodness, this incredible resource, this incredible, powerful, life-changing gospel that we can share with people, and it super applies to everything that's going on today, just as it did, all those years ago when it was written.
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely. I can distinctly remember at least 3 different times. I'm sure we had more conversations than that, but 3 lengthy conversations about where it started, of a little bit of anxiety about the future, like what's going to happen, and then, you know what, this is kind of scary, or I'm not sure about this. What do you think about that? Bouncing ideas off of each other, and then we'd end up at the end of those conversations like, you know what, the answer is Jesus, like in His Word, like specifically, like we draw out the principle, but ultimately it was like we just need to lean on Christ more for this, and we'd encourage each other. And I know I would walk away from that conversation feeling encouraged. And one of us, I think maybe you started saying this, but I started joining in too. We had finished those conversations saying, like, we should have been recording this. Like, I feel like we'd help other people who are dealing with the same thing. And and then, of course, we got this idea to where we were like, okay, we're going to do the podcast. And then we'd start talking about something, and it was like, well, we don't have the podcast ready yet, but we should have been recording this conversation while we're talking about it.
Yeah.
So it just, as we got closer, we got more encouraged. Like, yes, like if this is encouraging to us, or maybe I have a side conversation, because I don't even know if I've shared this with you, but there's sometimes where you and I had a conversation, and then somebody else would talk to me about something similar, and I'd say, I was just talking to my friend Dan about this, and we were saying this, and they're like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and like that really helps. And I was thinking, like, well, all we're doing is like bringing the truth of God's Word to it, and they're just talking about it in a way that is easily understood. And I was like, well, maybe that's all a podcast can be then, is just taking something from the Word, making it easily understood by the listener.
Yeah, drawing a direct line from the truth to the truth today.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what makes it, to me, that makes it easier. Like if we were doing one about sports or something, and I had to come up with an opinion about some team every week or whatever, I would fish that pond out pretty quickly.
Yeah, that would be a struggle.
Because it would be like, I'm not like those podcasters that just have these formed opinions about this kind of stuff. But when we talk, it's like, it isn't even about, it is a little bit of our opinions come into it.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
That's a part of it. But it is so much about, like, here's this thing that is happening in the world today.
Mm-hmm.
Here's this truth in the Word. I'm just here to connect those two dots.
Right.
And I believe that we as Christians we are not the sun projecting the light.
Right.
We are the moon reflecting the light back to the world.
Right. Yep.
And that's like that model, to me, it's like,
there's nothing to boast there, because we make no light of our own.
Right. And there's just an endless supply. As much evil as there is in the world, as much difficulty as there is in the world, there is truth to be reflected.
Mm-hmm.
So really, we are doing some work. There is some lifting involved, but it's a well that just never seems to.
Yeah.
Because there's always going to be, until the end, there's always going to be some kind of crazy thing going on in the world that deserves us pointing at it and saying, hey folks, yep. Listen, have a seat. Listen, everyone. Hey, this word here still had the truth about this a long time ago. Yep. Here's what it has to say.
All along.
And that gets me excited.
That's a great point that you brought up, because connecting that back with what we were saying towards the beginning of, like, this doesn't get necessarily the popularity or the traction that other subjects do, but whereas other subjects, like, you run out of certain things, or there'll be lulls. Like, I know you can say, like, those really never end either, but there's definitely, like, if you go and watch a podcast consistently, you can see where they're kind of grasping at straws. You're like, okay, it's a slow news day. There's not a lot going on in the sports world. There's not going on in this political world and all that kind of stuff. But there's always something going on in the world that you can point back to the truth of God's Word. There's just Jesus Christ Himself is infinite, so obviously His Word would be too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah. This is a fun question. Do you have a favorite episode that we've done so far?
Oh, I thought actually that you might ask me this. I really like the interviews. I liked all the interviews.
Yeah, those
I
are
liked
good.
the I liked all the ones we did with Cody were great. You know, it was just cool. It was a affirming thing. You know, when other people were excited about it. I loved our episode with Doug. I love Doug as a person. I just think the world of him. You know, I loved our episode with Dawn. And that whole situation with her has a complete other second part coming, and we haven't done the interview yet, but there's a whole other. I mean, I don't want to give it away, but like, oh man, how things changed. But I don't want to say anything more about that because that's not my place to say. But I will say, like, our interview with Cody was really cool. Like, just how excited he was about coming to talk and all the things he had to say. And it was like he had been waiting for something. And I think in part, he probably is thinking like, well, are you going to ask me to come back? You know? And
and we
most likely are. Yeah. It's just haven't. It's just with everything, we just haven't we haven't really had a conversation about that next step. And we have other people we want to interview. I have at least 3 other people that I have in mind, but our schedules are just kind of crazy right now with summer and everything. So it's just, like I say, it comes back down to that matter of resources. And, you know, really this is the truth of the matter. It is about resources, but it's also like this. This is not our podcast.
Right.
This is the Lord's podcast, and what he's doing with it, he's going to do in his time. And the second he's ready for this other set of ideas to come to fruition, they will. Yeah. And not a moment sooner. Right. And that's just the way it is.
We just got to steward this thing as well as we can.
Yeah, we're like a hopper of ideas, and we have them all kind of in there doing their thing, you know, and in the moment that it's ready, and I'll just like keep myself open to those opportunities and as they come up and some really good ones, really good ones, you know. And then like you and I talked like a while ago about scheduling for the summer and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, it got a little tighter, you know. Yeah. So what's the Lord doing next with it? Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Yeah. You know what I mean?
And we're still rowing. Like it's not like we've gotten off the ship and had to take a break for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I had a significant event in my life. And then I literally had said, like, do I? Okay, this is getting off topic, so I apologize for that.
Well, it may be a question I'm going to ask later. I don't know.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say that even through the course of that discussion, I had like a significant event happen in my life that I have not talked about on this podcast, and I had to literally ask, like, what are the things that I'm doing? I had to make everything earn its place again in my life. And so the podcast was one of them. Do I want to continue with the podcast? Can we still continue with it? And it was like the Lord made clear to us, yes, this is going to continue. But I literally had to say with everything, like church, you know, this thing, that thing, work, this thing, everything, had to say, where are my problems coming from? Is this a need? Is it a, you know what I mean? Is it a want? Is it a, you know, is it valuable? Is it this, answer all those questions. So yeah, it was like, not to say it was like on the chopping block or anything, but it was just one of those things. I think it is wise to
take inventory of your life.
Take inventory. Thank you. Yeah. And that's kind of what it amounted to. It was like an inventory taking moment. And I just went, okay. And then I talked to you and we were like, yeah, we're definitely, and you know, I think that was even like, maybe even right around the time that you were telling me that scheduling was going to get a little tight. And it was like
the timing,
but no, we both kind of came at it with the spirit of like, how can we make it work?
Yep.
And not coming
and no
at it
pressure.
With a spirit of, oh, this is why it can't work.
Right.
So lesson to you people out there, you know something's good. You know what I mean? You know it's like, oh, it's a productive thing when people coming at it with like an attitude of, how can we make this work?
Right. Yep. It's good. It's a good way to put it.
Were you going to ask me that?
Maybe not specifically, but it was like,
I didn't think so.
What have you learned from it? Yeah.
Okay.
That's down the ways, I think. But, so yeah, I agree with you. Like I really enjoyed the interview episodes. What's cool about those, I think, is everybody's got a unique story to tell of how Christ has worked in their life. So when you tap into that, it's just literally any person, a genuine believer, will be able to tell you some amazing things that God has done in their life. And I think kind of what you were alluding to, like, you never know when that same person you're talking about today, events can happen over the course of like a month or so. And it's like, wow, now let me tell you what God has done in my life just since that interview. So yeah, it's cool. But yeah, I think So this is kind of on the flip side of that last question.
Real quick, you didn't say your favorite.
So I think my favorite is actually the one that you gave your testimony.
Really?
Just because I was like, this is a powerful testimony, and I think people resonated with it.
Wow, thank you for saying that. I really didn't. That was one of those ones where the self-doubt really creeps in, you know?
Sure.
And that was kind of like a tough one. And I know it wasn't like, it's definitely not one of our more popular episodes. We have a couple testimonies in there, and the testimonies seem to do well.
Yeah.
But for some reason,
I've got the stats on that coming up.
Oh,
here,
okay.
So you might be surprised. But yeah, I like that one because I remember walking away from that episode thinking that's what this podcast is all about.
Oh man,
like telling our stories, but hopefully helping other people who are going through the same things in life. So
I know that one was actually more popular on YouTube than it was through the downloads.
Right. Yep. Yeah, I tried to kind of combine those for that stat.
By the way, we are not opposed to doing the video version on YouTube. I know if you're listening on YouTube, it's probably the audio version. It's just production time. We just don't have the time to
a little financial.
Yeah, which is all comes down to that. I mean, you're doing everything you're doing. Not if that.
We've talked
not to
about
mention
it.
that pesky 40-hour-a-week job we have and everything. You know, getting in the way of all of our, you know.
Yeah.
You know, and then it's like, and then family and.
Yeah, essentially, this podcast is like I would call it a part-time job, but it's like my third job. So
it's our artistic expression a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah,
and so
I'd say definitely like so you, the listener, probably don't know this, but Dan handles pretty much all the audio only productions.
Blame him.
He mixes it. No, I'm not. I'm saying you handle like really the heavy lifting and making sure it sounds good. And then all I do is like add a picture or something and upload it to YouTube. So I'll spend a little bit of time, but I'm kind of managing the YouTube channel. Dan manages Buzzsprout, which feeds it to all the other avenues where you might be listening to it. So on the flip side of that last question, what was the episode that you were most nervous or uncertain about, and why?
Oh, definitely the Christian response to LGBT.
Yeah, I think I was going to say that too.
Yeah, we were really early on in our journey in this
that was
podcast,
a bold move.
That was a bold move, and I think that had to be handled in such a way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the one that my wife was most nervous about, and it was the one that I was nervous about because we really know each other. But at that point, how do I say this? Like, nobody really knows, especially in a podcast setting where I would know generally now where you would go with it, but we didn't know at that time. We didn't know what the future held at that point. Where you could have been like,
the timing was such like,
it could have gone south, and I think it went really well.
Yeah. The timing was such like, if you want to do it while it's relevant, now is the time to do it. But like you said, we were only a month in to recording podcasts.
Yeah, so we were super green.
Yep. So it was a bold move. But I look back, so on top of all that, even though I was most nervous about that one, in fact, that's the only episode, I'll just say this is the only episode where I actually asked Dan to send me a copy of it ahead of time before we released it publicly so I could listen to it again. Because I went away from it thinking, oh, I think that went well. And then like the same day, like later on, I was like, oh man, I don't even remember exactly everything I just said. I want to listen to it.
Yeah. Well, they would happen too in a little bit of a buzz in your head when you're done. You'd be like, I don't remember what I said.
Yeah.
Now we're a little more comfortable. You know what I mean? We're just having a conversation now, but back then it was like a bit of a whirlwind.
Yeah.
Our first 3 episodes that we did were awesome because we were just like beginner's luck.
Yeah.
That was our sophomore effort where we were kind of like, okay,
now let's get in the nitty
Let's
gritty.
see if I can say this really intense thing,
Yeah.
and really like, and it was timely too because our city was having its first Pride Fest thing at that point, and we wanted to get it out at that time,
right?
Which is kind of silly because we're not that popular.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Now it would be more relevant because we've gone a year or whatever, and here we're coming up on the second annual, and like we talk about it all the time, so I'm not as inclined to necessarily make an entire episode out of it. But it was one of those things where, number one, it's a hot topic. Number two, we're taking a controversial view. Number three, we're kind of inexperienced. You know, and it's like this laundry list of things that sort of like lend itself to, oh, this is really making me nervous, you know.
Yeah.
And then like, are we going to handle it in the right way? You know, because
Right.
you really do want to lean away from like certain things and not in a way that you compromise the gospel, but just, you know, you want people to understand that you love them and care for them, and this isn't an attack.
Right.
On the same hand,
There's a twofold message.
there's a twofold message there, right?
Mhm.
We want to be able to say that it's wrong as Christians. We believe this, that, and the other thing,
Right.
but also we want you to know that we are like, we're not better.
Right. Yeah.
We're not, you know what I mean? And so it's hard to
Yep.
strike that balance when you're new at the podcasting game and you're sort of,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Absolutely. You know, if you think about it too, I think I probably started out talking about it this way, but when it comes down to what you believe about those things and how you articulate it, it's such a tricky line to walk, and I think that's kind of what poured into the nervousness and the uncertainty about it. But overall, looking back and reflecting on this, because this is my next thing I had in line here to talk about, was our top 5 most listened episodes. And I'm just going to kind of jump here to the third most, because what we just talked about, the third most listened to one is that one we just got through saying, the Christian response to LGBT. That was episode number 5. And I was also going to say this. That was back when we went through a season where we were breaking them up in parts. And I think you had to for that one, or it'd have been a really long episode.
Oh yeah, it was like a 3-hour block.
Yeah. But anyway, that was our third most listened to episode. And what's funny is if you go by YouTube, the most listened to, or by Buzzsprout, it changes depending on those two. Some are more listened to on there, and some are not listened to at all over there. But this was the one episode that had the same amount of traction in both avenues. So YouTube and Buzzsprout had a lot of traction. And what's funny was we had a backlog because YouTube didn't start until about late October. So the backlog made it so where right around Christmas I published the one about LGBT. And I was kind of bracing, like, here's the first time, like, if somebody's going to get mad in the YouTube comments or whatever, they're going to do it. We didn't have – it's actually 100% liked. Nobody disliked it.
That's one thing I do like about YouTube is that we can get that one-to-one.
Yeah.
I really like. I would encourage you, if you're a person listening and you have questions or anything, we absolutely read those. They're not overwhelming at this point, so it's not hard for us to see them. So, you know, if you have questions about anything we say, we might say, hey, email us, you know, because we don't want to start a flame war or whatever in the middle of a YouTube section. That's not the purpose of it. But without a doubt, you know, if you got something to say, you can email us lifeandfaithpodcast@gmail.com.
If you've got a critique,
you can
let us know.
Yeah, we're open to conversation. I mean, we're if you just want to tell us how stupid we are, then that's your prerogative. But if you have a real question, or we had one guy reach out and say, I'm really struggling, I need help. I forget what he was really saying. Like, it was something like, how can you say that God is the only God, or something like that? Which is a
he
great
always
question.
struggled with that. He said, in his mind.
And how could there be only one God and not many?
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. And I think I responded with like, hey man, that is a complicated question, but I'm here. If email me right now at this address as soon as you get this. And I never heard from him, but you know, that offer still stands. We're eager to have those conversations. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, what's the point of doing it if you're not willing to have those conversations? Again, if you just want to tell us what a bunch of idiots we are, then, you know, you can do that if you want to. We'll just, you know.
You just reminded me of what I was thinking earlier when we were talking about the nervousness around the LGBT episode that we did. I remember thinking the driving thing, because I kind of hopped on both sides of the fence with it. I was like, maybe I shouldn't. But what pushed me to say, no, we need to do this, is I was thinking, what's the point of having a Life in Faith podcast if we're not talking about real life issues and relevant issues that are present today?
Exactly.
So, and that's kind of driven us the entire way. So, number one, overall, surprisingly, it's not by much. It used to be about double all of our other episodes, but the pilot episode, if you will, that we did, the very first one that was like, life and faith, marriage, all those kinds
Yeah,
of
yeah,
topics.
it
It
was
was
a
kind of a
conversation, yeah.
conglomerate. It was actually a spontaneous thing we did. We didn't come prepared with that topic. We just turned on the microphones and started having a conversation,
Yeah, yeah,
like we always said we should.
yeah, yeah. I think my goal at that point was to do hour-long episodes, and we get them an hour, here and there. But I really wanted the long form,
Mm-hmm.
and it became apparent pretty quickly that was going to take more time than we needed, than we had.
Yeah.
That's why we started breaking them up, because we still wanted to have the long conversations.
Yeah.
But then it became
We didn't
like,
want to break up the flow.
Yeah, and then it became like, well, I don't know. It just made more sense to try to break them down into smaller bits.
Yeah.
Smaller parts.
Making good use of our time.
Yep.
Yeah. So number 2, closely followed. This was only like 5 people less than that, and the reason why, there's a big discrepancy between Buzzsprout and YouTube. Dan's personal testimony, that episode I mentioned earlier.
Are you adding them together?
I'm adding them together. Yep.
Oh,
yep.
Okay.
So if you add YouTube and Buzzsprout together, downloads plus views on YouTube. So it may not be quite apples to apples, but that's just the way I wanted to do it, because this is a perfect example of a big discrepancy in the viewership.
Yeah.
And maybe you could chalk it. The title is slightly different. I put on YouTube Dan's personal testimony of how he came to know the Lord, and then on Buzzsprout it just says Dan's personal testimony. I have no idea if that has anything to do with it, but there it is. Maybe there's more people curious on YouTube, a different audience, maybe. So the third one down was the LGBT episode I mentioned earlier. 4th is tips for dealing with your family during the holidays. I also really enjoyed that one.
Yeah, that was a good one.
So apparently a lot of people resonated with that.
Yeah, well, that was right around the time when I started thinking, because I think what I originally, in my mind, I was like, I'd like to go through Galatians or something like that. And that really isn't the point. That's more like teaching for a discipleship class, which incidentally is what I was doing at the time, because I was thinking, I could double the content, but
nothing
it
wrong
really
with that
wasn't
necessarily.
It wouldn't. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it, of course. But it really was right around the time when I thought, no, this thing should be about living life in faith, and how do we connect the word to problems that we're having today. I heard somebody give advice today about something they were struggling with, and the advice that they gave was put on the full armor of God. And I was like, that's not a bad thing to say, but it's just not practical.
It almost asks more questions than it answers.
Yeah, and I kind of was like, it's not wrong, okay, and I don't want to take in if that, I doubt that person's
especially
listening.
if someone hasn't been growing up in church, they're not going to know what that means.
Yeah, it's just an example of more of a theoretical.
Or new.
It's more of a up in the ether a little bit, but then right when I wrote that episode, or when I came up with that idea, it was like, this is a practical way to use this word in your life, and that's really what it's meant to be.
Yeah,
it's really meant to be a practical solution, and we so often we get into the theoretical about it, especially on Sunday mornings. It's like, here's the theory. Okay, cool.
How do we apply it?
Yeah, and it is such an important thing, especially for people like you said who haven't been in church, who don't know how to apply it, who don't know how to take that step from, you know what, I remember in the Word it says this, da 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 da. You know? So
that's a good point to point out, like, the growth of our podcast, because I feel like it has kind of morphed into that more. I wasn't really thinking about that prior to this, but the other episode that I have kind of in the bank, so to speak, that we can record later today is birthed out of a question somebody asked, and it was a practical life question. I'm like, let's apply God's truth to that and how you practically live that out. So, yeah. So after that episode on the holidays, in 5th place was the mental health and the Christian condition. That's actually episode 2. So quite a bit of people resonated with. We actually had sort of a part 2 to that episode at the beginning of this season that we've entered in, where we talked about Blue Monday. That was one that did not get very much viewership. So it's like they're both kind of in the same vein, but one got really high. And I think a lot of these earlier episodes, like, people gave it a chance and they kind of fizzled out.
Well, and I mean, it is like we are really still new.
Yeah.
even in the
Yep.
first year.
Yep.
I think somebody told me that Alex Hermosi said he did 100 episodes of his podcast before anybody noticed it.
Oh, okay. Wow.
You know, and so
Yeah.
that gave me perspective.
encouraging,
You know,
yeah.
because it's
Mhm.
it's encouraging, but it's also like, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
But 100 episodes in my mind is 2 years
Yeah.
before, and I was like, that does give me hope, because then I say, like, okay, if we just keep at it and we
Yep.
keep doing these things, like just having chats and stuff, and keep, the Lord keeps giving us good stuff to talk about, then there's really no reason, by virtue of not giving up, we'll succeed.
Right.
You know.
And we've talked about this many times before, but when we're talking about planning the podcast, we've always just kind of said, if we lift up the Lord, He will draw people to the podcast just because it's His truth. It's not ours.
Right.
Nothing that we have to bring to the table necessarily. So we've got that one. And then after that, just a few more I'll list here. Episode 3 was pretty popular. That's reading through the Bible demystified. I think that resonated with a lot of people because a lot of people mystify it. Surprise, surprise.
Well, that's something I'm pretty passionate about, and so when we recorded that, I remember I was psyched to say it. You know, I'm always psyched to say that one, because that one really, it is it's like one of those things that for whatever reason Satan wants to keep people from doing.
Yeah.
Is just reading the Word, and so I know so many Christians, and I'll name their names. No. I know so many Christians that just they go to church every week but don't ever crack the book.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not a guilt thing. It's just a matter of I'm too busy, or I'm this, or I'm that, or it's too complicated.
Yeah, a lot of Christians,
it is thick,
they psych themselves up about it.
Right. They psych, and then they go, and then you go, well,
or psych themselves out.
Yeah, I know what you meant.
Yeah.
But they're kept from it. And what in the world would keep you from reading the Word? Is it God keeping you from reading the Word?
It's like there's a concerted effort.
It's like there's an organized effort 180 degrees from right.
Yeah.
That's keeping you from it. So anyway, that's one I get passionate about.
Yep, that's a good one. Right after that, it's another example of the big discrepancy between like YouTube and all the other podcast areas. That's the Crisis at the Texas Border episode that we recorded. It's funny because on Buzzsprout, if you look at those numbers alone, that's our second most popular, right behind the pilot. But then you add in the YouTube numbers, which is six people. All of 6 people listen to that one on YouTube. So when you combine the YouTube numbers, that one gets bumped down to 7th place there. Then so that was episode 37, and then the next one down is episode 25, the Life and Faith and Technology with Doug Smith. So that was one of the ones that you were talking about earlier. That's one of your favorites. One of my favorites too. Shout out to all of our guests that we've had on here that we've got to interview that have agreed to that. We had my dad, Benny Bullock, and then we had Doug Smith. We had Don McCoy, and then we had Cody Baldwin. That's right. So,
we just said your name, Cody. Said your last name.
Shout out to all of you guys for joining us, and hopefully there'll be a lot more, maybe some returns, but also a lot more people we interview in the next coming year.
Oh yeah, we got some good ones.
And in fact, on that note, if you guys as listeners have anybody that you would like to hear on this, it gets a little difficult if they're not able to be here physically. But maybe in the future, that's another change we could do.
Yeah, we can definitely make something work.
Yeah.
If it's something that you guys, there's something relevant to what's going on today, I mean, there are plenty of ways we could make that work, especially with tech the way it is and stuff. We can definitely make we'd roll out the red carpet for whatever we have to do to make something really good work. So
yeah, absolutely, we're open to it. The YouTube Shorts, I won't go as far into that one, but I just want to make mention, we're not doing those quite as much anymore because I don't have quite the time for it. But when we did do that, the most popular YouTube short by far just happened to be from the episode number 24, where I gave my personal testimony, and it's about 25-30 seconds condensed version of the gospel, just exactly what the Bible says you need to do to be saved. And I just thought that's so cool. On the other hand, it may have the highest viewership. It's also one of the most controversial things we've ever put on YouTube because it has one of the highest dislike ratios. And thankfully, nobody flamed us in the comments.
I'm almost more excited about that than I am the likes.
Yeah. It's like, you mean all I have to do is believe in Jesus Christ and accept him by faith through grace, and like a dislike.
Dislike.
I do not like that.
I think it was
I want to work
probably
for my salvation.
Yeah, I think it was probably 50% people just heard it and were like, I don't want to have this in my feed or whatever,
Yeah.
you know.
I don't want people talking about Jesus. Yeah. All right. So I've got a few more questions here for you. What advice would you give to aspiring podcasters out there if you could go back, even talk with yourself in the beginning?
Ooh, yeah, good question. I would say make your podcast about one thing. Make your podcast about one thing. Make your episode about one thing.
Yeah. Figure out who your audience is and then give them one thing.
One thing.
Yeah.
Don't try to cover everything. And the second thing I would say is definitely do it.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
just try.
Just try. Because here's the thing. It's like Gary Vaynerchuk says, like, when you get a little piece of the pie, you're not taking a little piece of the pie from somebody else. There's plenty to go around. So, you know, you may not affect everyone, 100% of the people, but think about it like this. There are hit television shows that a large majority of people have never seen.
True. Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're hit television shows, and you don't have to be a hit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you just have to be popular with a small subsection of people. I mean, there's billions of people in the world, and if like 1% of 1% of 1% of people like that, like your episode, you can get paid. You could potentially do it full time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If
the word success it varies, like, depending on the person, but don't set yourself up for failure. Like, if you aim too high and say, I got to have this much or I won't be a success.
Yeah,
no.
yeah.
For some of you out there that are aspiring to be podcasters, you just need to view it as a success to start, put out some episodes publicly, and go for it.
And like, there's resources for this kind of stuff everywhere, and you know, you could reach out to us at lifeandfaithpodcast lifeandfaithpodcast@gmail.com, and I'll have a chat with you if you want, and I'll answer any questions, you know. And really, like, Impact Media is a great place to go. Think Media is a great place to go. Sean Cannell does a lot of really good stuff. He's a Christian dude that does a lot of great, like, content generation stuff, and Buzzsprout has a great YouTube channel that answers all kinds of basic questions, and it's really a simple process. So yeah, if you got something to say, then say it, you know. And yeah, I would say, like, definitely focus on being positive. Don't go out and just go out to bash something.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because you're gonna feel drugged down by that. I think you should just be optimistic.
There's
and
plenty of outrage media out there.
It's going around, you know.
Yeah. This is kind of a fun one. You don't have to have an answer for this, but I thought maybe I'd try it. What advice would you give to future you if you're listening to this episode a year from now?
Future me. Oh boy. What advice would I give to future me?
Something you know right now in this moment, but you want to hold on to for a year from now.
Oh. Wow. Okay. Well, I guess just believing in yourself. You know, it's really, like, been a struggle for me my whole life, so I think that really does come down to it, because it's like I look back and I go, okay, I was able to start this podcast with you.
Mm-hmm.
I had many, many self-doubts. I was able to do this, that, the other thing. I've accomplished a lot of things that I never really believed I could when I was younger, you know, and this podcast is one of them. Among other things that I've done, in some way, I have, on some level, always felt like I was a loser. And I seek accomplishments to sort of fight that perception of myself. And so this podcast, it's like, if we do it and we complete, and it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, an episode. A recording session has a beginning, a middle, and end. Right? A season has a beginning, a middle, and end. If we get to that end in a reasonable way, successfully, even if it isn't perfect, I feel like it sort of soothes the savage beast.
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
So I'd say to my future self, it's cool, man. Believe in yourself.
Yeah.
It's going to be okay. Do you know what I mean? Because I know
Yep.
those doubts are going to come back. Like I said about those episodes, those early episodes, it was like 50% willpower,
Yeah, just to get through them. Yeah, I mean, I think you're barking up the right tree there because, like, if we're listening to this a year from now, May, whatever, 2025, and our viewership numbers on Buzzsprout don't say like what are we at right now? 745? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
So if we're not at 1,500, don't sweat it. Don't sweat it.
Oof.
Like
I'm going to be sweating it.
Well, this is me telling you not to. Dan.
I know.
So, yeah, there may be a down year. There may be a year ahead of that is better than any year that we've had so far.
Mm-hmm.
There may be a breakthrough, and just keep going on. The important thing is getting the truth out there. It's not necessarily how many people are listening. If there is a lot of people listening, great, praise God. That's a gift from God. But if there's not, then hey, Jesus was able to get a lot done by just proclaiming truth to 12 men.
Indeed.
And we've reached way more than that. And hopefully those people continue to listen and are helped by it. So, and all we're doing is copying what Jesus said in his word and trying to put it in a podcast format. So, what is there, who or what inspired you the most for episodes that you've done?
Ooh, that's a good question. Most inspiration I probably got for an episode was maybe when I did the Christmas episode about taking how to deal with your family, because that was such a turning point. And so I struck while the iron was hot in that moment. Right? Does that make sense? Like I came to that realization that this is what we ought to be doing. Oh, we did read that Andy Stanley book, or I listened to did I buy it and give it to you?
Yeah, you gave me a book.
I bought the book. I listened to it, and I bought the book and gave it to you. But we read the Andy Stanley book about making your podcast about one thing, or making your message about one thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, and kind of around that time was when we narrowed our focus a little bit. We focused. We adjusted the lens a little bit and got a clear picture. And I think I was inspired by that moment. I've been inspired by the probability of having guests be interviewed and stuff like that. I'm inspired by that. I guess I feel like,
yeah, that's great.
I feel like logistically it's a little more complicated. And so in theory we actually inspired other people to make a podcast.
Right. True.
The Magnus Mindset. If you haven't listened to that, you should definitely check it out. That's written by a good friend of ours, Tim Balo, who just wow, like a duck to water. Like just really, what a great podcast. If you've not heard that one, they're shorter, and they're focused on life improvement and everything. But he basically was talking to me, and he said, "What do you use for your setup?" And I showed him a picture of what we use, and he's like, I got my podcast going. I go, really? I go, what equipment did you buy? He goes, what you showed me. Like here, I was like, oh my goodness,
It's awesome.
So yeah, that was cool. So people are being affected by that too, and all for the Lord and stuff, and so that's, if you look at it like you inspire one that inspires others, and
yeah, that's great. Like even if we didn't continue on for years and years, just knowing that other podcasts could potentially started because of listening to us or hearing about us, that would be great. Continue that on. What would you say is the biggest thing that's happened to you since this podcast has started?
Ooh,
in the first year.
That's a good one. Well, I was able to get connected with leadership in our church, although it wasn't really like as a result of this podcast. Is that what you're saying, or are you just saying?
Yeah, just not necessarily because of it, but just
since.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say that was probably the biggest thing. Like, I became an elder at our church and had a few speaking opportunities and things like that. Again, I don't think that had anything to do with the podcast, but I think that's just kind of the big life change. I did have another event that I don't really want to get into, but like the moment when I had to reevaluate everything happened, and so again, that didn't have anything to do with the podcast, but that was kind of a big deal. I mean, there've been some things.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah, it's cool how that stuff works. Like, you're faithful in one area, and then God brings other
Oh,
opportunities.
I see where you're going with there.
And chances. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, I would say just the opportunity I got this past January to become the pastor of a church. And I don't think I've necessarily talked about it on the podcast before, but, just being able to put myself out there, put out, be able to go through this podcast with you, record it. And I think that really set me up for being able to do, or just have more confidence in speaking to an audience. And obviously, all the glory for that goes to God. It's something that really is probably more suited for another episode where I could give like a full testimony of where I came from and how I got there. But yeah, it was a difficult year last year, but the fact that I had a podcast to look forward to and prepare for was just one of those little things that helped me along the way. Like trying to think of what I could say to help others also helped me in the process.
Yeah.
And that was a huge blessing. So when it comes to the podcast and working on it, does it add pressure to your life? Do you feel like it brings pressure?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think it is not real pressure. When I think about pressure, I think about families that are facing layoffs and houses that are in danger of being foreclosed on, and grocery bills that are becoming astronomical, and insurance bills that are becoming astronomical for families and for people who don't have the necessary means for for a better life. And that's real pressure. This is not real pressure. This is like first world pressure.
Mm-hmm.
So there's pressure in the sense that I do feel an obligation to what we're doing here, to do right by it and to do well with it. Mm-hmm. And to give it excellence and everything like that. But no, I don't. I mean, you know what I mean? Pressure is a relative term, and
we got to take responsibility for what we're preparing, what we're putting out there.
Yeah, but let us not call it pressure the way that you know what I mean.
I like that
families are facing and stuff. I try to keep that kind of perspective in most things, especially like when I hear people complain about how well or how not well their iPhone works. I just think like, you don't know pressure. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And like you haven't seen pressure, and that's sort of like, I guess I used to be a lot nicer before I heard people complain about stuff like that. But I used to be like, oh, let me help you with that.
Yeah.
But now I kind of feel like, well, maybe you should get like a real problem.
Yeah.
And this is not a problem. This is a blessing. And I'm blessed to be a part of it. And
opportunity.
And, a great opportunity, in fact. And,
Yeah. Who would you say is your favorite podcaster right now?
Ooh, what a great question. Let's see. I love the Pour Over. I think that's really great what they're doing.
Yeah.
I've been listening to Gary Brecka, a health podcast. I've been listening to Andrew Huberman a little bit. They get a little bit brainiac for me. I like the brainiac stuff, but not as much in a long form. I can't always understand it. I've been listening to this guy called Mike Mazzalongo, and he's a pastor out of out of Oklahoma that does a series. Is doing a series on the Bible. So it's not really a podcast. It's more like a video series.
Sure.
But I turn it on and listen to it on headphones, so I experience it in the same way.
Yeah.
And I like him, and I'm trying to think of who else. What about you? Are you listening to anything? I mean, I know you weren't really.
Yeah,
before.
I've maybe slightly increased the amount of podcasts I listen to. I occasionally listen to what Living Waters puts out there in podcast format.
Okay.
Let's see. There was one other. I found this guy Mike Winger. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he has a really great way on his podcast of breaking down a lot of issues. What I like about him is he takes stuff that people really, I think, overcomplicate about the word, and then just breaks it down in a pretty simple terms. I don't know necessarily if I would 100% agree with everything that he says, but if you think about it, who out there do we agree with 100%?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that's
we
a
should
little
do one
overrated.
about. That's an interesting point. I'm probably going to make a note. We should do one about agreement is overrated.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just looking through my list here. I listen to Bigger Pockets Real Estate, definitely. Love that podcast. Think Media is great. Mentioned that earlier, and then the
But which is your favorite, Dan?
National Academy of Sports Medicine. I listen to that because I'm
They're all
a certified personal trainer, and so I listen to that. But I don't really have a favorite. It's like,
That's what I
who's your
was
favorite
thinking.
band? I don't really like, it's too many.
I figured that
different
would be a difficult one to answer.
Yeah, and I'm sorry that I don't have a straight answer for that, but those are just the
Some
ones
good
that-
suggestions, yeah, for sure, for somebody listening. Which accomplishment in the podcast are you most proud of?
I think just the cadence of weekly posting.
Yeah,
I'm
being
proud
consistent.
of the downloads, and I'm proud of the weekly posting that we've been able to keep that going. I just
Yeah.
really am. They haven't all been perfect, but man, we've been consistent with that. And I really was concerned at the beginning that we weren't going to be able to do that just because of scheduling and everything. But
Yeah.
it's been good.
Are there any accomplishments you'd like to achieve by this time next year?
Oh, I definitely want to get to 85 episodes. I want to get over 1,000 downloads. I'd like to interview people more. I would like to figure out how to monetize, not because I want to make a bunch of money or anything like that, but I'd like for it to float on its own.
Yeah.
I'd like for it to support itself, and I would love for it to support a team of people to handle the technical side of it. So like what I could do is like we don't do any social media.
Yeah, even just one person to regularly put it out there, I think would make it would increase our reach by so much.
I'm happy to cut out the ums and uhs and all the little things, little moments of like, I just cracked my knuckles a second ago, so I'd like to be able to edit that kind of stuff out. But to hand that raw sound file to somebody, have them do it, and to have social media people to post on their social media and stuff like that and to handle that kind of stuff. Because we just don't have the time. We just don't have the time for all that. And so I'd like to see all that. I'd like to get over 1,000 downloads. I'd love to get I wouldn't mind doing the video side of it, but again, like that all comes down to resources. So
Yep.
I got a lot of fish to fry right now in my personal life, and I just know that unless the Lord makes a incredible shift in my life for the things that I'm rolling around with, I won't be able to handle increasing the responsibility that I already have with this.
Right. Yep.
So,
Mhm.
and I feel like you're the same way, right? It's
Yeah.
like he's gonna have to change something.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to have like a benevolent donor, come along and say, I bequeath
Yep.
to you the resources you
Yep.
need.
We've got about 5 loaves of bread,
And 2 fish.
2 fish right now, and it would have to be a miraculously multiplied situation for us to do something like that.
Yeah,
But we'd love it, right? Like we're
Yeah,
not opposed to
I
any
actually-
of those.
I actually took out a loan to buy the 5 loaves and 2 fish, so that's where I'm now. I didn't take out a loan, but but that's like
He
I
considered
borrowed the fish and the bread in a basket, and
yeah.
that's where I'm at.
Okay, so that's all the questions I have for today, but I did want to finish with one last thing. This goes to Dan. This goes out to Sheila. This goes to Stacy. Those are both of our wives, respectively.
wives.
And their support of us, their patience with us through this. So really, our entire family. But then also, our local supporters who have been very supportive of us in this endeavor. Also to anybody abroad. We talked about how every continent, at least that Buzzsprout keeps up with, minus Antarctica. There's somebody out there listening. So if you're listening to this episode and you've listened to us in the past, we're just very grateful to you. I was thinking about saying that, and I know Dan feels the same way, but I really think it would be great to end with the note that Paul said here in Philippians chapter 1 and verse 1, where he said, "Grace be unto you and peace from God our Father and from the Lord Jesus Christ. I thank my God upon every remembrance of you, always in every prayer of mine, for you all, making request with joy, for your fellowship in the gospel from the first day until now, being confident of this very thing, that he which hath begun a good work in you will perform it until the day of Jesus Christ." Thanks again for 1 year. Thank you for listening to the Life and Faith podcast. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review on your favorite platform, and sharing it with friends and family. Your support helps us continue spreading the gospel of faith, hope, and love. Connect with us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and many others to stay updated on our latest episodes. See the link in the show notes for all our social media channels. And until next time, it is our hope you'll commit yourself to an even deeper life in faith.